Hi, this is Aaron. In this video, I'll be discussing the sound design and FMOD implementation for my project Farcaster Villa. I'll also touch on challenges I faced, as well as areas I think could use some improvement. The audio assets were recorded and designed by myself, then implemented into Unreal Engine 4 using FMOD. The sounds are organized by primary and secondary categories, as well as by loops and one-shots. I separated the events between character and environment sounds, with environment sounds organized into additional subcategories. Where possible, I use the events folder structure as the framework for the mixer groups and routing. I created 3 different snapshots that are activated with trigger volumes in Unreal Engine 4. 2 snapshots provide subtle reverb changes depending on whether the character is standing in a courtyard or hallway. The 3rd snapshot triggers when the player enters the portal and ducks all audio except for the portal sound. There are currently 3 different footstep types for when the player walks on concrete, concrete with leaves, and metal. I first attached notify events to the character pawn animation. Then, I created 3 physical surface types in the project settings. Next, I applied the surface types to all parent materials the player can walk on. Finally, each time the notify event is triggered, the animation blueprint performs a downward line trace to determine the surface type, which it then uses to play the appropriate footstep event at the player location. Recording wind and birds was a challenging part of this project. Noise pollution from highway traffic was far too prevalent. I hiked up a local trail to get away from the traffic, but once I got to the top of the mountain, I found the wind was far too intense that day to get any quality recordings. Later, I found out that some relatives have property just outside of town, and they allowed me to gather recordings there. My problem with noise pollution was mostly solved, but clean recordings were difficult to get due to general ambient noise and possibly hardware noise. Eventually, at the nudging of several game audio professionals, I purchased Isotope RX, which allowed me to salvage what I thought were useless, noisy recordings of birds, and now I don't know how I ever lived without it. Since then, I have learned that recording wind passing through objects and foliage tends to produce better results. Once I had my assets polished and prepared for my level, I found placing them convincingly was more difficult than I expected. I didn't want to overload the environment with too much ambience, and considering my wind recordings were not the best quality, excessive white noise was proving to be problematic. Additionally, I ran into phasing issues with overlapping events. The obvious solution is to create more ambient loops from the source material, but my intent was to keep the design and implementation as lean as possible. I believe implementing audio occlusion will go a long way to resolve many of the placement and phasing issues I experienced. For the portal, I wanted to imply that the player was stepping into a completely separate space with an encompassing ambient energy. I used a snapshot to duck all other audio upon entering, including the character sounds, to make the space seem more abstract and surreal. You'll see here that I'm a bit of a fraud, and this is not a true portal, but rather a hallway made to look like one. I originally experimented with making the audio a 2D event in FMOD, but found that without spatialization, the portal was not convincing. I decided to take the original sound and split the left and right channels into separate audio files, then place them on each side at regular intervals. I had to fine-tune the distance attenuation and gain to ensure that the crossover points were relatively smooth and didn't introduce phasing issues. Considering video games are an interactive media, I would like to introduce a simple puzzle to the level. The idea is to require the player to find 1 to 3 objects that must be placed near a coolant pump for it to turn on and activate the portal. This function would give me an opportunity to learn how to create game states where different audio events occur depending on player interaction. I would also like the portals to function as they do in the book, where the player would cross the doorway threshold into another world, rather than the pseudo-wormhole effect I currently have. Audio occlusion is the next feature that needs to be implemented into Farcaster Villa. Currently, environment sounds can be heard clearly through walls, which played into my difficulties placing ambient sounds. Unreal Engine 4 does have a built-in occlusion feature, but I am more interested in building the functionality in FMOD to deepen my understanding of its capabilities. Finally, I would like to record better quality wind samples. My current recordings are not very clear and sound too much like white noise. I think experimenting with different microphone placements around foliage and buildings could achieve much better results. That concludes my video on the sound design and FMOD implementation for my project Farcaster Villa. This project has been fun and a great learning experience. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Take care.